My name is Dr. Daniel Weiss, and I am a professor at Lawrence Tech University. I have been studying literature and preparing for a career as a university professor probably since I was 19 years old. I was a full-time instructor at Lawrence Tech University, and I recently resigned. And this is a narrated copy of my resignation letter that took quite a while for me to decide to do this, but there are things at Lawrence, one thing in particular, which was very upsetting. And this letter is more than a resignation letter. It is an aggregate of my experiences and my desires to be as good as I can be, and hopefully it will be revealing in some ways for us. This is the letter that I wrote. Dear my chairperson, I hope that you are well. I would like to inform you that I am resigning my position as full-time instructor at Lawrence Tech University beginning January 2024. I would like to continue to teach as an adjunct, teaching one World Masterpiece class and one American Literature class per semester like I was doing before. I would hope that after nearly 10 years, a teaching award from LTU and much student success that I would retain some class priority. This has been a painful decision. Over the years, I have expressed my thoughts on teaching at LTU and the way with which LTU treats its faculty, specifically in its compensation. But I feel it necessary to express my thoughts definitively here once again. Let me begin by saying that I've always worked hard and that I love teaching at LTU, but its pay practices are unfair and demeaning. First, I am an excellent professor. I've spent nearly 30 years learning and then teaching and honing and writing in the service of teaching. Particularly for the classes that I've been teaching at LTU, my knowledge of history, theory, and the texts themselves have improved continuously, and this has benefited my students greatly. I have also an expansive YouTube video channel with many of my presentations on video, a huge undertaking I began with the beginning of COVID. Additionally, I recognize that there are also other great instructors here, educators. There are also some that are not. Importantly, my students and I connect. First, in my style of teaching, I am a human being, and even stubborn students, for the most part, have come around to see the value in these classes, and more importantly, in their own individual experience in it. The learning of literature is a multifaceted experience. It is the learning of history, culture, language, and the texts themselves, and all of its possible meanings. And it is learning about ourselves and one another. As Ansi Jezierska wrote in The Breadwinners, when I only begin to read, I forget I am on this world. It lifts me on wings with high thoughts. In every text we learn about us, and that is sometimes overwhelming and epiphanic to my students. Moreover, I have made a difference to the students at LTU in more than one way. As you are aware, I have been a mentor and supporter of my students, have inspired them, persuaded them, and watched them embrace the mission, which in part is for them as LTU students, is the requirement to take literature classes. I have written countless letters of recommendation, and at the end of the semester I received dozens of PDF files with their senior projects as I solicit what those projects are, as they are more than happy to provide them, as they greatly care that I care. Interestingly, what also makes me unique is that I have taken engineering and CAD classes and regularly use AutoCAD and SketchUp in other work that I do. So I connect with the difficulty, learning, and project parameters that are outside the scope of my literature teaching. My strange resume helps my students, and I connect in the literature forum and their overall academic experiences through other shared experiences. And I publish in 2 fields. The range of what I teach within what I'm supposed to teach is substantial. We discuss Frankenstein and psychoanalytic theory, Oedipal triads and Joyce's The Dead and World War I. We talk about the American dream and John Winthrop, Robert Merton's theories of anime and social disorganization. America as a, quote, city on the hill, and violence in the West and in society, the history of the Caribbean and mass shootings and mass killings in culture and in the Odyssey, and gender differences in Simone de Beauvoir and queer theory and Judith Butler and the performativity of gender, and Tasso and Tancred and rereading of earlier Freudian interpretations. I sneak into the discourses of power, the confession, and Foucault. We pose the Purloined Letter and discuss chaos theory, and my students tell me about their lives and their studies and their struggles because they see themselves in Gabriel Conroy and Antoinette as we discuss post-colonial theory and wide Sargasso Sea. And we read Marx and the economy and class antagonisms and that they existed at the rise of civilization in ancient Mesopotamia. But I've updated that information with a discussion of an earlier civilization, the Cucutini in Bulgaria and Romania, and we discussed the Book of Job and suffering and Mary Rowlandson's narrative and Frederick Douglass and violence as a tool that is sometimes useful, but as Hannah Arendt discusses, that violence cannot be contained and what constitutes maleness and femaleness and what kinds of social pressures dictate sexual practices in different periods and all different times. And we talk about love. And was Joe Christmas right in Faulkner's A Light in August that it only exists in books? Or does it exist in the real world? And how real is Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses? Because it's pretty believable there. We talk about floods and God and Puritan poetry. And when Gilgamesh's Siduri says, make every day a delight, how this is reflected in American Transcendentalism and Walt Whitman. We read Xi Jinping and discuss Taoism and personal responsibility and nature. I ask if indeed we have heard the piping of men, but have we heard the piping of the earth? In my classes, we laugh at my jokes, and when my jokes aren't funny, they are funny. And at the end of the semester, it is high fives and hugs. And sometimes, thank goodness this class is over, just being real, we talk about definitions of whiteness and racism, and probably a bunch of things that if I were in Florida, I'd get fired. We talk about the failure of social, juridical, and religious institutions in the service of a variety of different texts. We talk about rape. We talk about Orientalism and the other, and modernism and romanticism, and I have some pretty sweet PowerPoints that always get high marks. We discuss trauma and its scholarly rise after the Vietnam War and then its pursuit of understanding survival during the Holocaust and then World War I and the expatriates. We listen to jazz and blues and discuss the art of Aaron Douglas and watch YouTube performances of Duke Ellington and Fats Waller. We look at art, and my mantra of interpretation is 1, what do you see, and then 2, what does it mean? And it holds, I think, pretty steadfast in many different mediums. We talk about life because literature is life, and we see ourselves in it every time we open a book, read a line of poetry, or see ourselves as cosmos in a small pool of water, as Thoreau tells us he sees. We discuss exploitation, and that most great literary texts like sacred texts ask, what is the meaning of life and how do we live a good life, here, now, in this class, and after. We explore memory. However, what I have given up as a full-time instructor and before as a full-time adjunct is substantial. First, I began a master's program in another field at the University of Michigan before I became full-time in 2020. I spent a considerable amount of money on that, and then I gave it up to teach full-time at LTU. In addition, there is the workload, which to do this right is substantial. And the stress of putting on a 3-hour production for a production team of 10 people by myself in an hour and 10 minutes every class session. That has been what it has taken, and that has been what I have done. But this has to be measured against what LTU feels that is worth and what value that dollar amount has to paying bills. LTU has changed in so many positive ways over the last 10 years, and it has all the trappings of a legitimate force. First, with your, referring to my chairperson, organization and care of the department. I found both you and the former chairperson incredibly supportive, and with you taking over from his tenure, and both of you are just good people. There has been an aggregate of additional resources, organization, and professional cheerleading to move our department forward into the future. At the university level, there have been advances, and from all appearances, LTU should stand tall with other universities in Michigan and beyond. And yet it comes down to the ridiculously unfair pay which undermines its legitimacy, especially today with the cost of, well, everything. It is nearly criminal to earn the pay that we do. First, there is no doubt that LTU's pay practices are unfair and were unfair before COVID, and that made what we do so much harder. LTU success cannot be only with new shiny things, research grants, and new biometric engineering investments. Without people, LTU is nothing. With the amount of time outlined above needed to teach full-time against the amount of pay and the absence of any decent benefits, which I don't accept, but I get an extra $20 per month by its refusal, it has been really tough to reconcile. John Smith, in a description of New England, outlined a new America, that if you worked hard, you would get ahead. You shall find at the end of 7 years occasion enough to use all his discretion. I have worked hard at LTU. The pay, however, has undermined my own sense of self, my self-worth. And is my working hard for my students to make sure my students are successful in part so they don't suffer from the unfair pay practices in their futures, that they can make a good living? Are LTU full-time instructors and their pay a cautionary tale for students, inherent within the class structure itself, to avoid or suffer in their own futures? In a pseudo-post-COVID world with the high prices of everything, the unfair pay practices are exponentially highlighted. It is really an awful secret at LTU. Pay should be double for teaching responsibilities only. In a recent letter from the provost, Richard Heist wrote, "On this World Teachers' Day, I am pleased to express the President's and my heartfelt gratitude to all of our distinguished faculty. You are the foundation of our academic community, upon which the university's pillars of research, creative practice, technology focus, interdisciplinarity, professional orientation, and industry immersion firmly stand. Your dedication to share knowledge, to create knowledge, and to inspire creativity and innovation is recognized and greatly appreciated. How can LTU recognize its own greatness, new facilities, new research, new technology, but fail to adequately compensate its educators on whose backs LTU's true greatness resides? It's confusing, destabilizing, and reprehensible." What exactly are we talking about? I have usually about 80 students each semester. They pay around $4,500 to take my classes. That is approximately, before athletic or other types of scholarship money, $720,000 a year in revenue that my classes generate. I was paid $23,000 per year. I could not accept the health care benefits if I wanted. It would be for my family more than LTU pays me, not including the deductibles. Because I did not accept the health care benefits, as I said, LTU paid me an extra $20 per month. You could work part-time at McDonald's and make more money than I did. I have a PhD in literature and a lengthy resume. For full-time work as a professor at LTU, yep, I was paid $23,000 per year. That is an unlivable wage and required me to be on campus part of 4 days a week, plus all my grading, lecture prep, research, and Zoom calls with my students, and I was, as I had always been, a spectacular professor. The answer to earning more money is not to teach more classes. Too many adjuncts teach more, and if they are successful, hats off to them. I don't see how it is possible to teach 8 or 9 classes with the care that is needed, and in order to make double what I make, I'd have to teach 8 classes a semester. With such a high demand of input, its result would be diminishing returns, aside from the continued sacrifice in other areas. Importantly, teaching full-time as an adjunct cannot just be, quote, doing what you love. That is unsustainable. But importantly, adjuncting as full-time work facilitates poverty. Absolutely, teaching is awesome. It is rewarding. And every professor has a huge amount of shaping power over their students. They are like CEOs in every class. However, it is not enough. Poverty against teaching at LTU, those two things go hand in hand. And working full-time in an impoverished state puts at risk, and I'm speaking not only generally but also specifically, on relationships with one's wife and children. Our great war is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives, from Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club. The stress of not being able to pay bills is substantial and destructive. In addition, the percentage of money that is at face value charged to the students who take my classes for a year should yield by any metric a much higher amount in pay for the person who generates that. Understandably, LTU is a private university, and there are scholarships, I recognize this, but how can LTU be excluded from a conversation about exploitation in the real world when it involves any other discourse like gender, income inequality, or race? My students, with my help and the other resources at LTU, hopefully graduate and make a living exponentially higher than the pay I receive. Kamala Harris once said, quote, "The American dream belongs to us all," unquote. Unfortunately, it does not. And while I don't meet the larger demographic to whom much opportunity is closed, LTU has put me in a demographic by its unfair pay practices. This puts me at odds with myself. How can I justify my self-worth at an exploitive pay rate? From Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, I was simply imitating reality, a rough resemblance of a human being. While I support LTU, my role is almost imitative, a bricolage of disparate ideas of what defines a professor. It must include more than just a love for doing what I do. Aluda Equiano wrote in the interesting narrative, quote, "At the very moment I dreamed of greatest happiness, I found myself miserable. I want to at least earn, or more than earn, what they pay at McDonald's." Moreover, most LTU students, even as interns, make more than full-time instructors, and ultimately LTU students go on to make, in most cases, multiple times more than the pay of an LTU instructor. It would be horrific for students to learn about LTU's pay practices and that it forces some full-time instructors to do odd jobs, grow marijuana, are on Medicaid, work other labor-intensive jobs, teach at multiple places, and the like, because they make so little. When Walter White in Breaking Bad decided to work at a car wash to help pay for his chemo treatment, it was pathetic, and yet high school teachers make more money than LTU full-timers, and in general have much better benefits. It was embarrassing when some students saw Walter White drying a car just out of the car wash. In the past few years, although my time has been limited by my full-time work at LTU, I've explored other work opportunities that some have come to fruition that I was forced to seek because of the absence of viable pay at LTU. And thus, like giving up another master's degree, teaching full-time takes away from not only my own self-worth, but the pursuit of making a living. It has been a very, very painful experience. I absolutely understand that you have no control over this, referring to my chairperson, who's a great guy. And I know you sympathize, and without an exact knowledge, I'm positive you and the tenure track faculty also deserve a lot more. At this point, I have been angry, sad, and confused at being full-time, as it was incorporated into my identity, as I hope to continue to love to shape and help my students, as many students as I could, to have meaningful experiences. We are not talking about MTV cribs or driving Ferraris or the like, but rather to make car payments. The inability to do so has dire consequences. Stephen Mesner in Crime and the American Dream writes, success, in other words, is to a large extent the ultimate measure of a person's value. LTU has everything else, but fails so miserably where it is most needed to succeed. I will have to curb my influence and inspiration with a smaller student body. Finally, there is the abhorrent statistic at universities, and this speaks to the larger, more perilous situation of academia in the United States. Across the country, that most faculty, about 76%, are adjunct. The ridiculously slow national recognition of this total failure in education hasn't resulted in much positive movement, and universities continue to exploit its educators. The anti-intellectual sentiment is strong and has historically been strong in the United States, and is continually supported by the very institutions where education is supposed to matter. A move towards most faculty at LTU are full-time avoids the startling statistic to some degree, but as we know, full-time instructors are called super adjuncts because the central discussion of adjunct deprivation has to do with pay. Teaching 4 classes all at one university results in the same earnings, even if LTU can slip and slide away from the part of that criticism as it can tout more full-time faculty, an obfuscation of the reality. The central and overwhelming issues on both fronts are benefits and a livable wage. I would like to continue to teach as an adjunct rather than a super adjunct in a smaller capacity as outlined above with 2 classes. I would like to think that my resignation matters. I know for a moment as you review this it will, but the university at large couldn't really care. That is upsetting, but it is the reality that I have been struggling with. That is my problem, I suppose. This academic, professional, and teaching experience should make me a professor that LTU would desire to have me stay as a full-time, fairly compensated professor. I'm certain the appeal of redefining oneself as full-time will have great appeal for others in the adjunct pool, as my own identity will have to shift again in my future diminished academic capacity. Unless supported by my family or a significant other who works full-time, the realities of LTU pay for full-time work will become apparent for those who enter into the new position. Again, I hope I will still have some seniority in you, and the powers that be will continue to prioritize my classes I desire and regard me as an important constituent even as you move to younger other adjuncts into instructor positions who no doubt will rush to fill the vacancy. I have a fear that I will be punished for my resignation. I have ordered my textbooks for my next semester, so my schedule for next semester should be reassessed. It is with heavy heart I tender this resignation. Best, Dr. Daniel Weiss.